Today, I reckon our podcast is almost like a book.
This woman's journey, story, I want to put it, could be a movie, no doubt about it.
And I have no doubt that it will be a book and it will be a movie at some point. And we're going to start at the beginning and we're just going to flip through the pages of her life. Hang around for a journey today.
The Brown Podcast.
Question.
Hit me with it.
We talk a lot in the podcast today that you're about to hear with Xanthia Gregory about your future self. Now, if Dion at 47 years of age could go back, say, let's go 25 years.
Oh, yes, okay. Interesting time in my life, 25 years ago. Yep.
What would future Dion tell 25 year ago Dion?
I would say don't worry. Mm-hmm. Don't worry about what you're going through now because without going too deep and meaningful about it, but the journey of my life to get here, there's been some serious lows, some serious highs, and in those serious lows, I was so stressed and so worried about what this is going to mean for the future. I was worried about what this means for me as a person and all this. And I look now at the point in time that I am now in my life, everything that I've been through has led me through to this point here where I'm talking to you. We talk to great people on this podcast. I've got a great job and it's all because of, I mean, if one of those steps over the last 20, 30 years didn't happen, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I would 100% say, don't worry about it. It's all going to be okay.
You'd be sitting in your wife's office with a rubber chicken hanging behind you and a little Mexican hat from a tequila bottle on your microphone.
Exactly. What more could I... Look, had you told me that 20, 30 years ago, I would say there's no way I'm going to be living that dream. Hey, look at us here now. This is the pinnacle of success.
Xanthia Gregory, hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hi.
We were just talking before we started the podcast and I have absolutely no idea where to start with you because your story is quite phenomenal. But let's go back. Okay, let's go back right to the beginning. You were born in Australia in a rural area, but you had, as you've described, you had quite a disadvantaged or a severely disadvantaged youth.
Yeah, you could say that. First of all, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
No worries.
Secondly, I think the nuts and bolts and the details of the story are fascinating and fantastic, but the real message of what I want to try to get out with what I'm telling in my story is that it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter what stage you're at in life. You can not only make it through, but you can become more and you can reach a deeper level of living because of what you've been through.
And I didn't want to come on and go, hey, you've done this, and this, because your life is a story.
It should be a movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's why I sort of thought, let's go right back to the beginning.
Right.
With a severely disadvantaged childhood. What do you mean by that?
The funny thing about the story is that there's a lot of light and shade. So I grew up on a goat farm, surrounded by goats in this perfect, idyllic setting of rolling mountains, rivers, trees.
Mm-hmm. What kind of goats?
So dairy goats.
Isn't there only one kind?
Dairy goats.
No, there's a lot.
Yeah, there's like my daughter, my middle one, Noah, is really into pygmy goats at the moment. She wants a pygmy goat. And I'm like, not on your life.
I think you should.
They're so cute. No, don't encourage it, please, Dina.
Yeah,
thank you.
Do it. And they do the fainting routine, and it's so
yeah, the fainting. Have you seen the fainting goats?
Yeah. What?
I know we're getting sidetracked, but there's fainting. If you get a second, later on,
make your notes.
Google or YouTube fainting goats. It's very funny.
Very sweet.
All right, keep going. Okay,
Sorry.
Okay. Back to the podcast, people.
We're going to stop at all stops along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
We will.
And my dad was a refugee. He was from Slovakia.
Mm-hmm.
So he came here, escaped the war and came here, and he had obviously a lot of his own trauma that he was dealing with. So he worked very hard, but he also had developed over the years quite a severe gambling addiction. So
Right.
whilst my mum was working as a dairy farmer and then 2 other jobs, he was siphoning off money into gambling. So she was
What sort of gambling was it?
the ponies.
Oh, the
Yeah.
GGs. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So goats and ponies so far.
Goats and
Okay,
ponies.
good. Yeah.
The sad thing about this story is that when people are in that vulnerable position, like my mum was, they tend to make pretty dumb decisions. And so that's where the story started to unpick itself, because around the age of 13 or 14, my mum and dad, they were what they call born again. So they started getting into Christianity, which in itself can be fantastic, but it can also open up a lot of doors to predatory behaviour from the religious community.
So this was rural that you were living. What is the Christian or the born-again Christian population group like in a rural area? I mean, how did your parents come across it? Was it embedded in that community already?
So there's a lot of religious sects and cults and cult-style communities up in the mountains and up in rural Victoria that people don't have any idea about. And they can operate under that guise of kind of not flying under the radar.
How did they get themselves, because this is the next part of your story, your family became involved in a Pentecostal cult.
What's a Pentecostal cult?
Honestly, when it comes to like the religious talk of the different stratas, it can be really confusing. But essentially, Pentecostal Christianity is the newer age Christianity. So you've got Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity on that side, which is quite kind of keeps to the scriptures and that sort of thing. And then there was a new movement of Christianity, which included there's talking, speaking in tongues, there's prophesying, there's a lot more spiritualist activity that goes on.
So did they discover the Christianity through gambling and needing something to change in their life? Is that what they were sort of doing?
I think my mum was at her wit's end, but she also had, now that I look back, she'd reached a mid to late life crisis and had reached out for any form of breakthrough or something to assist her, which is where this came about, this search for some sort of answers. And Christianity and that movement offers those things up in a real package.
So you joined a cult.
Well, they didn't know they were joining a cult.
You didn't know you were joining a cult, but how old were you? You said what, you were like
13, 14.
13 or 14.
It was so intense. It was so dumb. And it's good I can laugh about it now because I look back now, it's like a movie. Anyway, so this organisation, they're in 60 countries in the world. And this is what people don't realise about cults, is that it's not, okay, this group is a cult and that's it. It's that any sort of religious organisation can show cult-like demeanour with the people that are in their group. So, you know, it's not about me pointing out this particular organisation and saying they're bad. They're in 60 countries in the world and they do fantastic work. They feed the hungry in Africa, they rehabilitate drug addicts, they do all sorts of things. But one of the pastors was sent out to Victoria to create a new leg of this organisation here. It's not the same way now, it's changed. But when I was involved in it, it was up in the mountains in Kinglake and it was cut off from society completely. So we started going to these meetings, these, church kind of gatherings, and there was a lot of love bombing going on at that stage. It has really similar traits to an abusive relationship where it starts off
like a grooming.
It's exactly the same as any form of abusive relationship. Yeah, that grooming, the love bombing, the promises of great things,
Yeah.
So that was kind of put out there.
So your family not fell for it, I guess, but were looking for something, so they went into this. So, and you said they were segregated. Does that mean that like you had to go and live in that area with that whole family?
Yeah, so had this group kept to what they were doing, which is rehabilitating drug addicts, and just kept it to that, it probably would have been okay. But their mistake, I think, and the unethical moves that they made was inviting families to come and live on the same property. So year 10, I was taken out of school. I had a normal upbringing in a normal school up until year 10. And then that's where the beginning of that like intense trauma happened, because I was taken out of my community and placed in this. It was a property, like a fairly large property, and there were houses all over the property. And then there was like a central common place in the middle.
But that's a pivotal age too. At grade 10, you're just starting to find yourself. You starting to get your collective group, and to be pulled out of that on its own, and to be put into something foreign, private. Yeah, that would have been a real transition. That would have been difficult. Or
well,
how did you process that at the time?
Yeah, those first 7 years of life obviously are the most important, but then it goes incrementally as important after that. And obviously, like you're saying, I was just starting to create, my sense of my surroundings and who I was and all of those sorts of things. But at the same time, I could say that the school environment's the Wild West. It's
it certainly is.
It's really savage. And so I would never paint it out to say I would have been perfectly fine had I stayed at school. But
fair call.
But it's just the intensity of the, what at the end of year 9, you're at a school, everybody knows you, and then you're gone. And so that in itself was a thing that I had to work through for a long time.
Sure.
So you're taken to this property where you're now calling home. You mentioned in there, and we can cut this if you need to or you don't want to talk about it, but you said it's predatory and it's like preying upon children as well.
So, and I do always want to speak about this in the correct way. Because that's really important to me, that it's not about me slandering any particular organisation.
Yeah.
But I was 14 at the time, and there were mature age helpers that had come from the other organisations and were working on the property with us. There was one man that was, 30 years old and was trying to get me to leave there with him, saying he was in love with me and grooming me on the side. And so there was just the problem with organisations when they're not put together in a way that's governed properly and is connected to other, governing bodies, is that anything can happen. And we're all humans, and we all need to keep accountable, because things can turn real nasty real quick. And so I can pretty much say it was a horrendously, heinously put together organisation here in Australia, which created, ongoing issues for a lot of people.
Do you ever speak to anybody that was part of that now, or have you just cut yourself off from it altogether?
There was another family that was living there with us, and I'll speak to those girls sometimes, and we both have the same. Both have the same interaction where we're like, did that even?
Yeah.
Did it even happen? Yeah, because it would have been like a bad dream, a nightmare.
It was bad
at
trip,
the time,
man. Exactly. That's exactly what it was.
So how long were you? Okay. So your family's there, you're there. What was the moment that you realised this is wrong? All types are wrong, and we need to get out of here.
It's difficult to explain when somebody's brainwashed and when somebody's indoctrinated at that young age. The regular process of any sort of thought is not the same. So my experience with understanding how wrong it was because of my suppression of that trauma was much later on. So what Christians believe in some organisations and things is that the female should submit to the male. It's her position to serve, and the male's right. So my mum, she's quite a fiery woman. She's, fantastic. She's full of life. And that to them was seen as a danger. And there was constant back and forth between her and the head pastor, because she would say, I want to go out and visit, because I've got some older siblings who didn't come in with me. She would say, I want to go and visit my kids. He'd say, no, you've already been out this month. And she'd say, okay, but I'm not in here for rehab. I want to go and visit my family. And he'd say, no, you're not allowed to go. And anyway, you need to submit to your husband.
Wow.
And, you know, that sort of behavior rips apart an individual's identity and who they are. And so over that time, she was suppressed more and more until she said, I can't do this, I've got to leave. And I'm taking Xanth with me.
So how long were you there for?
So that's the wonderful thing about homeschool, is that you're self-paced, and finished year 12 in 6 months. So I used to wake up at 8 in the morning and finish it. Well, I did about 2 months of homeschool with mum. And then I said, just give me the books. Let me do it. So
I'll do it myself.
So for those 3 years, I taught myself and finished that. It's finished year 12 in 6 months, so left when I was 17 and a half.
This is the Brown Park Podcast. Now, a word from our sponsors.
All right, stop, collaborate and listen. We're going to talk about grow clinics for a second and not my awesome rapping skills. Are you ready to regain the confidence in your hair? At Grow Clinics, they specialise in natural hair restoration solutions tailored just for you. So whether you're dealing with thinning hair, a receding hairline or alopecia, their experienced team is here to help you achieve a fuller, thicker head of hair. Now, why choose Grow Clinics and not take off to one of those half-assed places in Turkey, I hear you ask? Because Grow Clinics have the proven results. The treatments are backed by years of experience, and they have countless success stories from satisfied clients. And it's also about their personalised approach. They understand that each person's journey is a unique one. That's why they offer a personalised consultation and a treatment plan designed specifically just for you. Now hit up their experienced team at growclinics.com.au. That's growclinics.com.au for a free consultation, and tell them Brown Park sent you.
This is the Brown Park Podcast with Christo and Dion. Now back to the show.
Once you got out of that, what was the progression after coming out of such a traumatic experience where you'd been groomed and you'd been indoctrinated into this whole Pentecostal world that wasn't,
Extravaganza.
Sorry?
Extravaganza.
Yeah, extravaganza. What happened? Where did you go, and how did you start to then rebuild your life?
Because you and your mum left, right? So you and your mum left at the same time. And your dad stayed?
Dad stayed because he was on the spectrum as well. So he was just being where he was accepted. So they kept him going.
Okay.
As we left, the Black Saturday fires came and burnt down the whole place.
Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people.
The universe works in mysterious ways, doesn't it, eh?
So then moved down further towards the coast to a different place. And you're energetically and your heart is like connected to, like, that was my community. It doesn't matter how like horrible it was. That was still all I knew. We talked to them and they said, why don't you go and serve in the Portugal leg of this organisation? So I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went over to Portugal and I lived there for a year, and I worked in a warehouse for 6 days a week and then went to church on Sundays. So I was part of the organisation there doing that. And then...
So it was different there? Was it different there or was it similar there?
It was different. It still had the same... It was still rough because it was like rehabilitation centre, So it was, dealing with... Like, I remember in my bunk bed that I was on the top, the woman that I was sharing the bunk with, she had both of her ears had been bitten off in fight.
My
Far
God.
out. That's when you know you may not be in the right spot, but okay, keep going.
Like the European rehabilitating drug addicts they make us look like Teletubbies. So...
I love it.
Well, you did say you're amongst the hills, and the green grass. So
Look at that correlation.
Yeah, well done. Good. Yeah, so I spent that time there, and then I came back. When I came back, I was living outside of the organisation, but I was still going there every Sunday. That's all I knew. And there was a couple of new workers that had come from overseas to work in the one here. And so I started building a connection with one of them. And, I was 19 and he was 30. And we ended up leaving together and getting married at 19.
At 19.
And how long had you known him before you got married?
I'd say 8 months.
Okay, so it's quick.
And it was really quick. And he had come from the streets and he was an ex-heroin addict. And he was street smart as anything. And looking back, he really utilised that scenario of me being vulnerable and me being brainwashed and thinking that I had to get married, otherwise I was going to go to hell, and really kind of coerce the situation to that coming about in the way it did.
Did you love him? I mean, random question, but did you feel like you loved him at that time?
Honestly, I know what true love is now because I'm a woman. I'm a mature aged adult, and I understand how the world works. When you're a 19-year-old and you've been heavily indoctrinated, you've been brainwashed to the hilt, and you've been neglected by at least one of your parents, all you really want is this feeling of safety and connection, because that's all anybody ever wants.
So, 19, you'd been indoctrinated into the Pentecostal Christian cult church that had formed itself in Victoria. And now you were married to a man who's 11 years older than you. What was that marriage like?
It lasted 4 years. It had elements of it all the way throughout of emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, social abuse, physical abuse. It was extremely toxic. We were extremely isolated. We lived out in the suburbs, but because of his traumatic background and because he never got help for it, he had devised this plan where it was me and him, and that was it. It was kind of all that I knew. I sort of only knew captivity. I didn't know anything else.
So you had no friends? It was only just you and him? No friends,
It was me and him, and then these kind of acquaintances, and it was work, and it was us. And he started really heavily drinking in the first year. I had no idea what anything was. So keep in mind, I'd just come from being in the hills and then coming from a rehab in Portugal. I didn't know what anything was at all in society. So, we didn't have media or anything in the cult. So I didn't even have an understanding about what drugs were, I just didn't know. And so he would slowly, he was working as a removalist, and he would come home sometimes and he'd be off his head. And I'd be like, what's happening? Are you okay? Like, what's going on? And he would have found somebody's medication somewhere and taken it. Or, it was just this slow, tedious build-up of that addictive behaviour. And it got worse and worse as time went on.
Well, being an ex-heroin addict, obviously he has those he's got that addictive personality. And if he hasn't gotten help to address that issue, then it was always going to pop up at some time again, wasn't it?
Well, no trauma was ever dealt with in that organisation. It was removal from society, and it was, here, let's slap this Jesus Band-Aid on it. And if you just keep on going to these Bible studies morning and night, you're not going to have time to do anything else except for do that. And so this poor guy, he's 8 years sober, but still hasn't even started day one of recovery. So yes, he did awful things to me. Yes, he was irresponsible. Yes, he in some ways took away 4 years of my life, but I can only have empathy because I look at it and I think he had the disease of addiction, and he was dealing with some rough stuff, some really rough stuff.
I'm glad you understand that too, because a lot of people don't understand, because there's been people in my life that have had addiction issues with alcohol and various things, but people don't understand that it is an actual disease. There is something in their brain that they have something and they can't stop. And there's parts of the population that just think that it's a decision that somebody makes, that they're just going to go out and get written off, take drugs and get drunk. But I love that you're talking about it as a disease, because that's legit what it is.
It is, and it's so closely correlated with the level of trauma that you've experienced that it's so obvious and it's so clear to me that it's the escape of that pain. And because I've experienced that, I've experienced so much pain myself, I know what it feels like to try and run away from that.
So was he physically abusive?
So much violence. It was horrendous.
So okay then, how far you've been? Wow, what a story so far. So what was the moment there that made you get out?
Well, this is where it gets so good. It's so good. And there's so many takeaways from it, honestly, because I just have this theory that we come to this earth to learn lessons and to give those lessons and what we've taught to other people to raise the consciousness of the earth, right?
Yeah.
And so women are just incredibly strong. We're incredibly emotionally, physically we can put up with so much pain, but I just feel as though I was given the responsibility of domestic abuse as my task to understand the lessons, because the depth of pain that domestic abuse is, when you go through your partner physically choking you until you're unconscious, beating you, doing things like that to you, you experience this almost out-of-body experience where you say to yourself, I have to dig really deep, I have to find my way out of this, and I have to get myself safe. But also there's this, this thing happens in your heart where it breaks you completely open. There was a moment, and I've said this in my other interviews as well, a really poignant moment for me where I was lying on the ground after he'd pushed me over or done something to me, and I remember thinking to myself, when I get out of this, I'm going to give people the tools so that they don't have to go through the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so that for me was almost like a shining light where I realized that not only am I going to get out of this, but I'm going to do something with it as well. And so I started this process internally. It wasn't outside to begin with, but I started this process internally where I started piecing together, okay, what am I going to do to get out of this?
And how did you do it?
When I did placement at a place dealing with women who are dealing with domestic abuse. And they they taught us that every single woman who's going through domestic abuse, it may not make sense what they do to remedy that or to get out of it or to do something with it, but their spirits and their souls know what they're doing. They know when to do things, when not to do things, and how they're going to go about it. And so I stayed with him for 4 years, where the last year and a half, I'd say, was of me mentally getting myself to the place emotionally where I could leave, because he was all I knew.
Yeah.
So every single day I started building on this idea, right? And it was incremental. I started building on, okay, he'd go to work, I'd go to work, and I'd be driving to work, and I'd be like, it almost lit this fire in me where I was like, okay, am I going to do this? What am I going to do? What's the steps forward? And it started by, I didn't have a state recognized education. So I knew that to go to uni or to get any education, I was going to have to go to TAFE first. So I enrolled in an advanced diploma of business.
Without him knowing, or with him knowing?
He knew, but it wasn't, super encouraged. It was, okay, I'm going to do this. And I say to anybody who's going through a rough time, or especially women that are going through domestic abuse, if possible, educate yourself.
Yeah, love that.
Your education and your ability to level up your mind and your understanding of what's going on around you is one of the biggest tools that you can have on your side. So the education sparked something in me to really, I was like, I can really get this ball rolling,
So business degree under your belt, in a relationship that you want to get out of, what was that pivotal moment where you went, this is it, I'm going? Because I know that we've spoken to a couple of people in the past on our podcast where they've made that decision, and they've set the plan in place, and they've just one day just gone, boom, that's it, I'm gone.
Yeah, and it does have to go like that, because it's not a slow, gradual process at all. But before that moment came, the education itself wasn't going to be enough. I also realized that when I leave, I'm going to have to support myself. And this is where I developed this theory that our future self sends us messages to get to where we're meant to be going.
Yeah.
And if you are open enough, you can hear those messages and you can see them, and they're not just in plain sight. But I mean, it makes sense. If you take away space and time, which they're constructs anyway, we are just an organism that's living, So it makes sense that we would be sending ourselves information.
And not to interrupt you, but we believe in that in this household, that we call them whispers, that, essentially your future self is whispering to yourself. You just need to pay attention to those signs and actually listen. And if you don't listen, then eventually the whispers become louder and louder and louder until you get hit over the head with it. So I completely believe that as well.
Yeah, but I was in such an open state because I was waiting for any sort of message to come through. I wasn't praying because I'd put religion aside, but I was essentially open to, okay, I need some help from the universe here. Yeah. So I started having this idea of, I think I'm going to be a stripper, but I don't know if that exists or if I'm making that up. I don't know if that's from an 80s movie or like I wasn't even sure if that was a job available for me. But for some reason, I started developing this idea that I think I'm going to be a stripper and work in a club, and that's going to get me through. So I reached out to my parents, which I hadn't spoken to them properly in 4 years. I hadn't spoken to any of my family while I'd been married. And I said, can I have some money because I need to buy a car because I need to leave? And they gave me $500 and I bought an old rinky Ford Laser, and I literally packed. One day, I just reached that point where I was like, now's the time. And I packed as many of my clothes in my car as I could. And he came home.
Oh.
He was in a state because he, at that point, had been, had come home on meth, he'd come home on this, he'd come home on that. He was like a poly addict at this point. He came home and he saw what I was doing and he dropped to his knees. And he was there on his hands and knees in front of me saying, please don't go. And that, honestly, like that moment was probably one of the hardest moments because that was a moment where I broke away from everything that I knew. And this man was my whole world. And it was literally like an animal being in a cage for years. And then you open up the door and it looks outside at freedom. And it's like, that doesn't even look enticing. That just looks fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
And something from deep inside me knew that I had to do it. So I jumped in the car and I drove away. And that was a suppressed memory that I had for a long time because so much of that experience I couldn't face for a long time because it was too painful. Regardless of, what the religion taught me and all of those sorts of things, I'd been a really faithful wife. Like I'd really put everything into that marriage. And so it was really difficult for me to say goodbye to that, no matter what had happened, no matter what, And so it's when people go through those kind of situations and people say, why didn't you leave earlier? They have no idea. They have no idea what it's like to leave everything that you know.
This is the Brown Park Podcast.
But it's absolutely necessary.
Big thanks to Grow Clinics for continuing to support the Brown Park Podcast. And has your confidence dimmed alongside your thinning hair? Do you find yourself avoiding mirrors, hiding beneath hats, longing for the days your hair danced in the wind? Well, you're not alone. Hair loss can take a toll, but it doesn't have to steal your joy. With Grow Clinics, you can rewrite your story. They offer a path to rediscover your vibrant self, a journey towards a thicker, healthier head of hair, and their innovative techniques delivered by compassionate experts can transform not just your appearance, but your perspective. At Grow Clinics, they understand the emotional weight of hair loss. They believe in empowering you with personalised solutions, honest advice, and unwavering support. You're not just a patient, you're a partner in rediscovering your confidence strand by strand. So don't let hair loss dim your inner glow. Take the first step towards a fuller, happier you. Contact Grow Clinics today for a free consultation and learn how they can help you rewrite your narrative at growclinics.com.au.
This is the Brown Park Podcast with Christo and Dion.
So you've been through the Pentecostal church.
Into the abusive marriage.
Yeah. And then you've gone, okay, I'm out. I'm gone. You've made your break. You've gotten into your Ford Laser.
You sped away also slowly.
Yeah. It was 0 to 100 in 20 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. What was that feeling like and what did you do next? You said you wanted to be a stripper. Did you become a stripper or was that just something that you thought, okay, well, I'll be there?
Yeah, I became a stripper. Yeah.
Oh, really?
That's where she...
The next year was the most harrowing, I can't even begin to explain to people what it's like trying to rebuild your life after you put everything behind you and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to rebuild this again.
So where did you go? Just back there. So you got in the car, you drove. Did you have somewhere to go? Did you have something lined up?
I have an older sister. I reached out to her. I drove up to her house and I arrived on the doorstep. I said, can you please take me in? So I don't have anywhere else to go.
So she didn't know you were coming?
No, she didn't.
Yeah.
She had 3 kids, lovely husband, and they welcomed me in and took care of me and sort of nursed me back to health. So I stayed with her. I worked for her husband. I worked in hospitality because I always worked hard. I was always in hospitality, working hard. And slowly started building my life up. But when I was living at hers, I was researching into strip clubs and things without her knowing because I knew that she'd say no. And then I said to her, I'm going to move to Melbourne. I enrolled in a psychology degree at Monash. And I moved to Melbourne. I applied to all these different strip clubs to work at them. And I applied to, at the time was Goldfingers, but I went for my first night there and I had $20 in my account. I said to myself, with this pure anger, because I had been left with thousands of dollars of debt because everything was in my name. Oh. And he had just racked up, credit card bills and things like that. So I think I had about 12 to 15K.
Far out.
Which at the time was a lot, So I was just furious. I was furious at, my parents, at this, at that, at everything. So I was like, fuck it and fuck you. You, fuck you, I'm going to be a stripper.
Yeah.
And that was the energy that I took into my first night. And I made about $1,000 in that first night.
Holy shit. And you would have went, okay, this is for me for now. This is what's going to get me through. This is going to help support myself.
$1,000 in a night.
It's going to get me through uni.
It was honestly I had felt, and I know that this sounds really strange to people because people have this really weird concept of what the stripping industry and what the adult industry and everything is. And it can be dark. It can take people under. It can be really, it's not for the faint of heart. But I went into that industry with a sense of finding my own empowerment.
Yeah.
And I went into the industry because I wanted to be able to take control of my own life. And I knew that was financially, but also doing something that was my choice and not anybody else's. And so, Goldie's was a little bit rough for me. And I always say that the stripper is led to the club that's for her. And so I ended up going over to Men's Gallery, and I did my first night there. And I thought, I'm home. I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna do it. And to be honest with you, people glamorize it. It's very, very difficult. But for me, it was the first time that I had been protected because there was security. It was the first time that everything was for me to decide what I was going to do. It was the first time that I was getting paid. It was the first time that, that sense of empowerment, that sexual empowerment, because my sexuality had been really stripped from me with that religious experience, telling me that, I was overly sexual and that, I needed to cover up and I needed to do this and I needed to do that, and essentially shaming me for my own sexuality, And so working at this club and being at this club was my way of rehabilitating myself, no matter how strange that would seem from the outside.
And you'd also been suppressed by marriage as well, so you hadn't really had much of a chance to sort of...
at all.
You hadn't lived.
I hadn't lived at all in any way. And it's just, I look at life now, and you guys would understand this, obviously, is that life is so rich. Yeah. And there's so many areas that make up a rich life as well. There's, your family, there's your friends, there's the things that you do that bring you happiness. But there's also being able to explore what's for you and what's right for you without being told, what's right for you. Say for somebody like me, even as a little kid, my desire for movement and all of that sort of stuff, which the church deems as sinful, that was me, and still is me. And so being able to explore that was just so important for me.
Did it change your perspective on men? I asked the same thing with a previous guest that had been a stripper.
I know she had Slovakian mum.
She did too. Correct. That's right. Her mother was lesbian.
Yes,
Yep.
that's right.
Yep.
I listened to that. It was great.
So did it change your perspective on men at the time? Did you be like, was there any, I don't know, did you start to think, all men are fucked or you never had that?
Well, so far you've had predatory men and then you've had one that's isolated you. So, God,
I like to be non-biased in my approach to life. But if I was to have a bias, I always say that every woman should do a 6-month internship at a strip club. And I say that because the curtain gets pulled back. You get to see how men behave when they're not on their best behavior. Mm-hmm. You get to see them around the boys. You get to see them talk to their wife and say, I'm going to bed, and then hang up the phone and go for a lap dance. You get to see people doing the worst. You get to see people at their lowest. I had men crying on my shoulder because they'd been through divorces. I had men come to me because they needed advice about their relationships. I had men come to me. So I'm trained to be a therapist, but my real therapy started back.
You were doing it when you were stripping, yeah.
I was going to say, you're like the psychotherapist stripper almost. You were sitting there helping these people out while giving lap dance. That's crazy, isn't it?
There might be a business model in that, who knows?
I honestly, I'm a huge advocate for not the industry itself, but I'm a huge advocate for the women who work in the industry.
Yeah, for sure.
They, to me, are the most inspiring women I've ever met because the stuff that they put up with, their ability that they have to work through what they see in front of them is insane. Yeah. It's insane. And it gave me a lot of insight into society and the way that society runs.
Wow. Okay. So...
I love this.
You're welcome.
When I say I love this, I don't mean that, I'm happy you went through what you went through, but I mean, I love this story and that we're here now talking about it.
I love it too. I love it that you love it because I love it too.
Okay, so are you still stripping?
No. I gave it up because the stripping industry didn't pivot with the times, and people's expendable income in Australia in particular is not where it used to be. So when I first went into the club, you could work a full night and you could make 2, 3, 4K. But then towards the end, about a year before COVID, I started looking at it and I was thinking, this is not adding up. Like, I'm doing this, and it was actually the perfect, like those 4 years of doing my undergrad and doing stripping were just the golden years, because I was stripping on the weekend and then Monday would come and I'd go back to uni, and I did that back and forth, and it just created this, I was in the trenches, I was learning. I was in the trenches, I was learning. So it was just this back and forth, but it's hard on your body, it's hard on your mind, it's hard. Like, I was drinking heavily. I was not living like a healthy lifestyle. And any of the girls that knew me, like, I was good in the club and I was like a good worker and all of those sorts of things. But I was also like heavily affected by my experience there, because it's not easy.
Yeah, of course.
When COVID hit, all the clubs shut down, and I used that as my time to say, okay. And I had just finished my psychology degree. So it was a perfect little...
So COVID hit. Obviously, the world went into lockdown, but now you're a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And a practicing kinesiologist.
Yeah.
For those that don't know, because I'm only new to the world of kinesiology, with my wife has just recently discovered it. What is kinesiology?
Oh, it's just the most amazing modality. It moves stuff. Okay, let's put it this way. You can sit and you can talk to a therapist for years and years and not really get anywhere. You lay somebody on the table and you start kinesying them, and stuff starts shifting through them. Like, even in one session, the person's completely different. They get off the table, they're brighter, they're lighter. They're like, oh, thank God for that. Like,
isn't it funny? That's happened to my wife.
And was her experience the same? Was she dumbfounded by it?
She, from day one, came back and went, oh my God, I'm booking that again. That was amazing.
Right?
I've never had anything like that before.
From the moment that I started it, was really profound. Like, I felt like, this is this is what I'm meant to be doing. This is one of the things I'm meant to be doing.
So kinesiology is basically, it's like actually, I'll get you to explain it because you are a kinesiologist. I don't know why I'm trying to explain it.
Know
I
what
don't
your wife
do it.
told you. Yeah,
I'll do it.
I know what my wife says about it.
Okay.
So, yes.
Here's how it works.
Oh, no, hang on. I want to hear Christo explain it. Come on. No.
No.
So kinesiology, okay, we have the conscious part of this, which is the top 10%, and then we have the subconscious, which is what we're actually operating from. Our body is the antenna, I guess you could say, like where everything is driven from. So mainly from our heart space. We think that everything is head, but it's not. Like the head only controls our cognition and things like that. So we hold, you guys have heard of your body keeps a score, all of those sorts of things, where we hold in really like succinct and beautiful ways. We hold information about our trauma all throughout our body. The different areas actually explain what that trauma is and what it means and what those emotions are that are trapped in us. And it's pretty much unprocessed emotion. So when you're feeling something about what's in front of you, if you don't feel it to its completion, it gets stored to be dealt with later. So the way that we can access that and the way that we work in kinesiology is that we have found there's an ancient way of accessing that information, and it's through muscle reflexes. So you have the person lying down on a table, and I do what's called emotional metaphysical kinesiology, which is a little more spiritual than, say, you can also get quite clinical kinesiology, which deals with Chinese medicine and things. But I'm more the wanting to help people shift trauma in themselves. You can access memories in a person. You can access aspects of their connections with people. You can access anything, and you can work alongside that person and find information that helps them to move forward in their life and to release these things that are stuck in them.
It's funny you say that because that's exactly how I would have explained it totally. So I'm glad you did it.
I thought so.
The one thing I've noticed about your story is that you move in 4-year increments.
Oh, you noticed that too, huh?
You were in the cult for 4 years.
Yeah.
You were married for 4 years.
Yeah.
And now we're in the next 4 years, which is study and finding yourself. But it just that your whole story sort of worked roughly in 4-year increments.
It did.
So in 4 years' time from now,
Oh, watch out.
where do you want to be and what do you want to be doing?
Again, so I look to my future self and I'm like, what do you reckon? And I honestly don't know where the road goes, but I love public speaking. I love telling people about my story and encouraging them and activating people to get to where they need to go. And I didn't go through all that shit for nothing.
Yeah. Totally. I just want to turn the final page of this book before we let you go.
Okay.
Because we've gone through everything now. Are you happy in a relationship now? Is everything going the way you want it to now?
My life every single day is so delicious and sparkly and wonderful. My connections with my friends and with what I do and how I live is just incredible. And not only that, but I found a relationship with a man that I never thought that was available to me. And that's also my message to women out there that have been through a lot of abuse. There are men out there who are gentle and soft and accepting and respectful. And if you just open yourself up to the idea that that type of relationship is available to you, you'll find it. Like, I never thought that I would be in that, but I am. And if I can be in that, anybody can.
And I think you've just found the title of your book, your forthcoming book as well. It should be called Delicious, Sparkly and Wonderful.
At the very least, that's the title of this podcast. How about that?
Yeah, right.
Oh, confident. Well, thanks, guys. That was a good brainstorming session. I don't need to do any of the work now.
No, there you go. Xanthia Gregory, we'll put all your links and stuff in the notes of this podcast so that people can find out about your life and follow your journey.
And I want to say, I got goosebumps legit about 4 times while we were talking. I just want to say that. So
Oh, I appreciate you guys so much, and I appreciate what you're doing in this podcast and like giving the base for people to be able to talk about what they're talking about and your interest in everybody's, what they're going through. But yeah, just thank you so much for your interest. Thank you for this platform, and I just love that so much. Thank you.
The Brown Park Podcast.
Why are you happy?
Because I don't want to be sad.